In 1812, an ordinary coal miner woke up knowing the name, the clothing, and the method of a prime minister's assassin 11 days before the murder happened. In 1909, a modern, unsinkable passenger ship simply vanished with 211 people on board. No wreckage, no bodies, no distress signal ever received. In 1979, a Hollywood movie described a nuclear catastrophe in Pennsylvania with surgical precision, and 12 days later, it happened for real. These are not myths. These are not urban legends. These are documented events investigated by governments that still have no explanation. None. Today, we're diving into the cases that make scientists lose sleep, because the more you examine them, the less sense they make. Join us, and let's discover the most disturbing events science still cannot explain. Let's go.
Number 13. Rosicrucians. Paris, 1623. You wake up in the morning, walk outside, and there are strange symbols painted on walls all over the city. Not in one neighborhood, everywhere. Alongside them, a single message. We, being deputies of the Chief College of the Rosicrucian Brothers, carry out visible and invisible presence in this city. No signatures, no faces, just the symbols, and the promise that 36 invisible agents had already infiltrated Paris with one mission: to sabotage Christianity itself. In exchange for loyalty, the order promised wealth, supernatural powers, and specifically the ability to teleport and become invisible. The city erupted into immediate panic, and this wasn't just any panic. France was already deep in its brutal witch-hunting era. Religious paranoia was at an all-time high. Then came these anonymous declarations from a brotherhood claiming to possess ancient esoteric knowledge passed down through centuries of secret ritual and alchemy. Monarchs demanded investigations. Church leaders called it a direct threat. Rumors from Germany confirmed the power and reach of this shadowy order, one that had supposedly been operating since 1614 under the name the Order of the Rosy Cross. The most fascinating part: modern scholars now believe the entire 1623 Paris event may have been completely fabricated, a sophisticated psychological operation designed to destabilize a city already on the edge of madness. Contemporary analysts would call it an information warfare campaign, the world's first documented viral disinformation attack, and it worked perfectly. Whoever put those symbols on the walls of Paris was never identified. That mystery is over 400 years old, and it still has no answer. But if an entire city can be paralyzed by anonymous symbols in 1623, imagine what happened when fire started falling from the sky.
A disease appears in England with no warning. No animal outbreak, no contaminated water source, no traceable origin. It simply began. And within hours, not days, hours, it could kill a perfectly healthy adult. The English sweating sickness was unlike anything medicine had ever encountered. Victims went from completely fine to drenched in sweat, paralyzed, and dead before nightfall. The mortality rate hit nearly 50%. To put that into perspective, if this disease struck your street today, half your neighbors would be dead by tomorrow morning. It wasn't slow, it was immediate and merciless. The disease struck 5 separate times between 1485 and 1551, wiping out nobles, scholars, and members of royal courts within hours. Then, in 1578, it vanished completely. No cure found, no cause identified, no final victim documented. It just stopped. More than a century later, in 1718, something almost identical reappeared in France: the Picardy sweat. Same violent symptoms, same terrifying speed. Different country, different century, no traceable connection. The outbreaks continued into the 20th century. 6,000 people were infected in 1906 alone. And then, silence again. Modern researchers have no preserved tissue samples, no genetic material, no definitive theory. Whatever killed those people was never formally identified. And here's the question that keeps epidemiologists awake at night. How many other ancient pathogens are frozen right now in the permafrost, just waiting for rising temperatures to release them? The disease may have gone quiet, but it was never destroyed. Now, if unexplained diseases are terrifying, What do you make of a fire that no one can explain? One that destroyed two separate regions at the exact same time, on the exact same night.
Number 11. Peshtigo Fire. Here is a fact most people have never heard. The deadliest fire in American history did not happen in Chicago. It happened on the same night as the Great Chicago Fire, October 8, 1871, in a town called Peshtigo, Wisconsin. And while Chicago burned and dominated headlines worldwide, Peshtigo burned hotter, faster, and deadlier, and almost nobody noticed. The Great Chicago Fire destroyed 17,000 buildings and killed several hundred people. The Peshtigo Fire consumed over 2,300 square miles, an area larger than the state of Delaware, and killed somewhere between 1,200 and 2,500 people in a single night. The fire moved so fast that residents had no time to run. People who tried to take shelter in rivers were still burned alive by the heat radiating over the water's surface. The fire generated its own wind system, a firestorm, hurling flaming debris miles in every direction. Witnesses reported blue flames, fireballs appearing in the sky before the fire even reached them, and an almost total absence of the normal black smoke that wildfires produce. Sand on nearby beaches fused into glass from the heat. Now here's where it gets strange. 4 separate major fires, Chicago, Peshtigo, Holland, and Manistee in Michigan, all broke out on the exact same night. Same date, same approximate time, different states, no known connection between them. And that same night, astronomers confirmed that fragments of Biela's comet were passing over the Midwest. If those fragments entered the atmosphere and ignited pockets of methane gas in the dry forests below, it would explain the fireballs, the blue flames, and the simultaneous ignitions across multiple states. But this has never been proven. 4 catastrophic fires, 1 comet overhead, 0 confirmed explanation. And if unexplained fire is disturbing, what happens when the ocean starts swallowing ships whole and keeps every single secret?
Only 1% of people know the dark truth behind what we are about to show you next. If you want to be part of the few who actually know what's happening in the world, subscribe and leave a like right now. Done? Look at this. Number 10. SS Waratata. July 1909. A modern passenger steamship departs Durban, South Africa, with 211 people on board. It was considered virtually unsinkable, built with reinforced construction specifically to withstand brutal ocean conditions. And it disappeared completely. Not one body, not one confirmed piece of wreckage, not a single distress signal ever received. This was only the Waratata's second voyage on the Australian route. On the morning of July 27th, the captain of a nearby vessel spotted the Waratata, and they exchanged light signals. By 9:30 a.m., the Waratata had moved beyond the horizon. That was the last confirmed sighting. What came next is a chain of haunting, fragmentary glimpses. Another ship spotted a vessel emitting unusual amounts of smoke, possibly a fire on board. As night fell, 2 massive flashes of light were seen in the direction the Waratata had traveled. Then nothing. A third ship reported seeing a vessel fighting extreme waves, listing heavily to one side. A wave hit, and the ship disappeared from view. The Waratata never arrived at Cape Town. Search missions launched in August, September, and over the following decades, all came back empty. Several times, researchers believed they had finally found the ship, only to discover other long-lost wrecks. The ocean kept every secret. But buried deep in the records of the official inquiry is the most disturbing detail of all. A passenger named Claude Sawyer disembarked in Durban and refused to continue the voyage. He sent his wife a telegram saying the ship felt unstable and that he had been experiencing recurring visions of an armored figure standing on the bow, holding a sword dripping with blood. He walked off the ship. 211 people stayed. And whatever happened out there in the South Atlantic has never been explained. But the ocean isn't the only place where reality seems to fold in on itself. Sometimes it happens in the sky. Number 9. TWA Flight 800. July 17th, 1996. A Boeing 747 departs JFK Airport at 8 p.m., heading for Paris. 12 minutes after takeoff, at 13,700 feet, the cockpit voice recorder goes silent. Then, an explosion. The aircraft breaks apart over the Atlantic Ocean. All 230 people on board are killed. The FBI and the NTSB launched one of the most expensive investigations in aviation history. They recovered 95% of the wreckage from the ocean floor. They physically reconstructed the fuselage in a hangar. They collected 700 eyewitness statements. 4 years later, the official conclusion: a fuel tank ignited due to faulty wiring. Case closed. Except it wasn't. Dozens of eyewitnesses, on boats, on beaches, on shore, independently reported seeing a streak of light rising upward toward the aircraft before the explosion. Rising upward, not falling, not horizontal, upward. That description appeared in 34 separate witness statements and was confirmed by FBI agents. The streak's trajectory and speed were inconsistent with any known mechanical failure. Investigators found trace explosives on portions of the wreckage. The official explanation was that these traces were residue from a police dog training exercise held on the aircraft years earlier. No documentation of that exercise has ever been produced. Then there's the radar data, which, according to multiple analysts, showed anomalies that were never addressed in the official report. The official cause remains faulty wiring. The unofficial debate has never stopped. And then consider this. Exactly 18 years later, July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over Ukraine. Same date, same aircraft type. The coincidences surrounding both disasters continue to generate more questions than answers. If a plane can disappear under circumstances that were never fully explained, what happens when an entire army almost vanishes, saved only by something no general could have planned?
Number 8. Battle of Long Island Fog, August 1776. The American Revolution was losing, badly. At the Battle of Long Island, nearly 1,000 American soldiers were killed in a single day. Over 1,000 were captured. The British lost fewer than 63. Washington had his army pinned, with the East River at their backs, impossible to cross, and 15,000 British soldiers advancing from the opposite direction. By every military calculation available, the American Revolution was finished. The country that would become the United States was about to die before it was born. And then, nature intervened. On August 28th, heavy rain fell, forcing both armies to halt. When the rain stopped, it left behind something strange, a thick, dense fog that refused to lift. This was midsummer in New York. Fog like this was not normal for that season. The British, assuming it was ordinary morning mist, decided to wait it out before delivering the final blow to the American Revolution. But the fog held all day. Not for an hour, not for 2, the entire day. Washington recognized the gift immediately. Under cover of the cloud, he ordered a full evacuation across the East River. Using every available boat, fishing vessels, ferries, rowboats, 9,000 soldiers crossed the river in complete silence, entirely invisible to the British forces waiting on the other side. By morning, the fog had cleared. The British advanced and found an empty camp. The army that should have been destroyed had vanished. That fog didn't just save an army, it saved a country. And meteorologists still cannot fully explain why it appeared exactly when it did, or why it lasted precisely as long as it needed to. What's more disturbing? A weather event that saves a nation? Or a dream that describes a murder down to the exact color of the killer's buttons 11 days before it happens?
Number 7. John Williams and Spencer Percival. John Williams was not a mystic. He was a hard-nosed mining executive from Cornwall, the kind of man who dealt in coal, ore, and profit margins. He had no time for superstition. And yet, in May of 1812, something happened to him that he spent the rest of his life unable to explain. 11 days before it occurred, John Williams dreamed the assassination of the British Prime Minister. In the dream, he stood in the lobby of the House of Commons. He watched a man in a blue coat and white waistcoat enter the hall. He watched a second man in a brown coat with gold buttons rush in and fire a pistol directly into the first man's chest. He watched the victim fall, and he heard witnesses identify the dead man as Spencer Perceval, the sitting Prime Minister of Great Britain. The dream was so vivid and so specific that Williams woke immediately and told his wife every detail. The dream returned 2 more times that same night. He considered warning Perceval directly, but his friends convinced him he'd be laughed out of London as a madman, so he waited. On May 13, 1812, his son burst into his office with the news. Spencer Perceval had been shot dead in the House of Commons. When the details emerged in the newspapers, Williams and his wife went silent. The killer wore a brown coat with gold buttons. Perceval wore a blue coat and a white waistcoat. The sequence of events matched the dream with exact precision, down to the specific clothing on both men. Nobody could have known this was going to happen, except, apparently, a mining executive from Cornwall, 11 nights in advance. But if one man can dream a murder before it happens, what do you make of another man who dreamed an exam, with every single question correct, word for word, before the exam even existed?
Number 6. Wallace Budge's prophetic exam. E.A. Wallace Budge would go on to become one of the most decorated Egyptologists in British history, curator at the British Museum, author of landmark translations, recipient of an honorary knighthood. But none of that happens without one single inexplicable night at Cambridge University that he could never explain for the rest of his life. Budge was a student who desperately wanted to lead an archaeological expedition to Mesopotamia. To qualify, he needed to pass an exam in the Assyrian language, one he didn't yet know well enough. The night before the test, he had a dream. He saw himself in an unfamiliar room with a large attic window. An examiner walked in and handed him a long envelope filled with green paper. He was left alone. He opened the papers. He could answer the questions easily, but then he encountered a text passage he couldn't translate. The panic was so intense that he woke up in terror. The dream returned 2 more times that same night, each time more vivid. Same room, same green papers, same impossible passage. At 2 a.m., shaken, Budge got out of bed and studied Assyrian texts until dawn. The next morning, he arrived at the examination room and stopped cold. The room was an almost exact copy of the one from his dream. Same layout, same attic window. The examiner pulled out a long envelope. The paper inside was green. The examiner explained he always used green paper because it helped him read cuneiform better. The questions were identical to the ones in the dream. The impossible passage, the one that had terrified him, was the one he had studied between 2 a.m. and sunrise. He passed. He led the expedition. He built a legendary career. And he never explained what happened that night. Dreams that predict exams are unsettling. But what happens when a dream predicts the disappearance of an entire island? One that vanishes the moment you try to reach it.
Number 5. Phantom Island of Ballycotton. On the morning of July 7th, 1878, the residents of Ballycotton, a quiet fishing village on the southern coast of Ireland, woke up to something impossible. There was a new island on the horizon. It hadn't been there the night before. It wasn't on any map. And yet, standing on the shore, they could clearly make out mountains, forests, and valleys. Not a blur, not a shimmer. An island with distinct, specific geographic features, sitting there as if it had always existed. A group of fishermen did what fishermen do. They got in their boats and rowed toward it. The closer they got, the more it faded. By the time they reached the coordinates where it should have been, there was nothing. Open water. No land. No trace. They turned around. From the shore, the island was visible again. There were witnesses. Formal reports were filed with local authorities. The event was carefully and officially documented. Scientists have proposed theories. A fata morgana, an atmospheric mirage that can project images of distant or underwater landmasses onto the horizon. Others have suggested it could have been a reflection of the actual island of Inishmore, distorted by specific temperature layers in the air. But none of these explanations account for the level of detail witnesses described. The mountains, the forests, the valleys. Mirages produce unstable, blurry images. What Ballycotton saw was specific and sharp. More than 140 years later, no one has produced a definitive explanation for what appeared off that Irish coastline that morning. The sea gave them a vision, then took it back, and never explained itself. But if islands can appear and vanish without explanation, there is one event where reality itself seemed to collapse, and it happened in Pennsylvania, exactly 12 days after Hollywood predicted every detail with absurd precision.
Number 4. 3 Mile Island Prophecy. March 16, 1979. A political thriller called The China Syndrome opens in theaters. The film depicts a catastrophic accident at a nuclear power plant, a cooling system failure, a near meltdown, and, most critically, a corporate cover-up, where the plant's parent company spreads false information to hide the true scale of the disaster from the public. The film includes one specific line of dialogue that would later become impossible to ignore. An explosion at a nuclear power plant would make an area the size of Pennsylvania permanently uninhabitable. 12 days after that film premiered, on March 28, 1979, the reactor at 3 Mile Island Nuclear Generating Station in Pennsylvania suffered a cooling system failure. A relief valve malfunctioned, contaminated water drained from the core. The reactor began to overheat. Emergency pumps activated, and then in a decision that remains one of the most baffling in nuclear history, operators shut them off because of contradictory instrument readings. The core temperature climbed toward 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, dangerously close to full meltdown. The parent company, Metropolitan Edison, publicly stated there had been no dangerous radiation leak. That was false. Subsequent inspections confirmed elevated radiation levels throughout the surrounding area. 140,000 residents of central Pennsylvania were advised to evacuate. The film had predicted the accident. It had predicted the cover-up. It had named Pennsylvania specifically, and it had done all of this 12 days before any of it happened. How a work of fiction described a real event with that level of precision 12 days in advance has never been satisfactorily explained. If a film can predict a catastrophe 12 days out, what explains paintings that seem to carry a dead artist's curse, surfacing and vanishing across centuries, on different continents, as if they choose when to be found?
Number 3. Caravaggio's cursed paintings. Some artists leave behind a legacy. Caravaggio left behind a curse. The defining Italian master of the 16th and 17th centuries painted with such raw, violent emotional power that his works seem to absorb the chaos of his own life into every canvas. And his life was genuinely chaotic. Feuds, religious disputes, violence, and a death so strange it still has no confirmed explanation. He disappeared in July 1610 at age 38 in Tuscany, and whether it was accident, murder, or something else entirely, nobody knows. But the real mystery isn't the man. It's what happened to his paintings after he died. They began disappearing, and reappearing, then disappearing again. The most famous case, Nativity with St. Francis and St. Lawrence, stolen from a church in Palermo in 1969. That painting has never been found. Interpol lists it as one of the most wanted stolen artworks in the world. Then there's Judith and Holofernes, lost since the 17th century, then suddenly discovered in a French attic in 2014. Ecce Homo surfaced in Spain in 2021, nearly 400 years after it vanished. Mary Magdalene in Ecstasy appeared in a private collection that same year.
The crowning with thorns, valued at 150 million euros, reappeared in Madrid after centuries of being considered permanently lost. These aren't coincidences, they're a pattern. Masterpieces disappearing and resurfacing across centuries, across continents, as if they have somewhere to be and choose when to be found. Is it the criminal art market? Trafficking networks? Or something stranger tied to the restless, violent spirit of the man who created them? No single investigation has ever produced a unified answer. And while Caravaggio's paintings surface and vanish around the world, there is a disease that did the exact same thing, but with entire populations as its victims.
Number 2. The Dancing Plague of 1518. July 1518, Strasbourg, in the Holy Roman Empire. A woman named Frau Trofea walked out into the street and started dancing. There was no music, she simply danced. Hours passed, she kept going. Days passed, she didn't stop. Within 1 week, more than 30 people had joined her, all dancing compulsively, unable to stop. Within a month, the number had reached 400. Local authorities, believing that dancing itself was the cure, hired professional musicians and built a stage to encourage the movement. That was one of the greatest medical mistakes in recorded history. The dancing didn't cure anyone, it accelerated the deaths. People danced until their feet bled, until their tendons tore, until their hearts simply gave out from exhaustion. Estimates suggest dozens of people died during weeks of continuous, involuntary movement. Nobody wanted to dance. Nobody could stop. Witnesses described wide, terrified eyes, faces twisted in agony, bodies in constant motion while people begged to be able to stop. Modern physicians have proposed theories: ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on grain and can cause convulsions and hallucinations; mass hysteria, extreme stress in a population already devastated by famine and disease. But none of these fully explain why only those specific people were affected, why the condition was so precisely localized geographically, or why it stopped as abruptly as it began. The dancing plague of 1518 remains to this day without a definitive medical explanation. It is the only documented historical event in which people literally danced themselves to death with no identifiable cause. But nothing in today's countdown compares to what comes next. Because the number 1 case isn't about a city, a ship, or a fire. It's about a single book that proves someone knew, in writing, 14 years in advance, about one of the greatest disasters of the 20th century.
Number 1. Morgan Robertson's Titan. An American writer named Morgan Robertson publishes a novella called Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. The book describes the sinking of a ship called the Titan, the largest vessel ever built, considered unsinkable, crossing the North Atlantic in April. The Titan strikes an iceberg. Most passengers die because there aren't enough lifeboats. So far, it sounds like a sci-fi story of its era. Now look at the specifics. Robertson's Titan. Length of 800 feet, speed of 25 knots, 3,000 passengers, 24 lifeboats, displacement of 45,000 tons. Struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic in April. The real Titanic, launched 14 years later in 1912. Length of 882 feet, speed of 22 to 25 knots, 3,327 passengers, 20 lifeboats, displacement of 46,000 tons. Struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic in April. The match isn't vague. It isn't the broad coincidence of big ship sinks. It is specific to the point of being deeply disturbing. The name, the physical dimensions, the speed, the passenger count, the insufficient number of lifeboats, the month, the ocean, the exact mechanism of the sinking. Robertson published his book 14 years before the Titanic was ever built. He was never able to explain where the story came from. He said it simply came to him while he was writing. When the Titanic sank in April 1912, journalists tracked Robertson down and confronted him with the similarities. He confirmed everything and had no explanation whatsoever.
He died in 1915, taking the mystery with him. The book was republished after the Titanic disaster under a new title, The Wreck of the Titan, because reality had copied the fiction so completely that the original title was no longer needed. No investigation has ever explained how Morgan Robertson described, with precise technical and narrative accuracy, a ship that didn't exist and a disaster that hadn't happened 14 years before.
If you thought this was terrifying, you are not ready for what they found in the video on your screen. Click it right now. The truth is worse than you think.